When she saw my bag, she exclaimed, "It's amazing," and became ecstatic. As I presented it to her, she opened her mouth wide and eagerly took it in, biting down. Seeing her delighted expression filled me with happiness too. When I asked for her impression, she spoke with tears welling up in her eyes, saying, "I feel so incredibly happy. I think it was the most beautiful smile in the world." But there were many things that happened before she showed me that smile. Let me tell you the story this time. My name is Sean Taylor, 30 years old. I work as a pastry chef at my family's cake shop. Recently, one of the staff members quit, so we were short-handed. On this day, I was exhausted from working overtime. Since I work at my family's shop, I decided to live alone so that I could relax and do things at my own pace after returning home. My apartment is about a 15-minute walk from the family cake shop. While descending the stairs of the pedestrian bridge on my way home that day, I slipped and missed a step. It was probably because I was completely exhausted and feeling dizzy. At first, I felt pain when I collided with something, but I don't remember much after that. It was fortunate that I didn't bump into anyone. When I regained consciousness, I was already being transported to the hospital. "Mr. Taylor, can you hear me?" a nurse said, the line often heard in medical dramas. With a vague consciousness, I turned my gaze towards the voice, and the nurse was just about to touch my clothes. The beautiful nurse who was about to strip me naked had a tightly fitting white uniform that was bursting at the seams. Most men might be particularly weak to well-endowed women, and I was no exception. I found her incredibly attractive. Yes, the nurse standing in front of me was my exact type. I felt like I had seen her face somewhere before, but my consciousness was hazy, and I couldn't recall. Anyway, even though I didn't know the extent of my own injury, I considered myself lucky just to have encountered a beautiful nurse, and I lost consciousness again. And when I woke up next, the treatment was already over, and I was fully conscious. When I was being transported and feeling dazed, I didn't realize it, but I actually knew the beautiful nurse I thought was lucky to meet. "Wilson, Margaret Wilson, right?" I muttered as I saw the nurse who came for a checkup. She smiled and fluttered her name tag on her chest. "That's right. It's been a while. When you were brought in, you didn't react at all, so I thought you had forgotten me." "No, I was just in a daze back then. There's no way I could forget." Yes, there was no way I could forget. She was my first love. She and I were classmates in elementary school. She was bright, kind, cute, and even excelled in academics. She was popular in our class. I, on the other hand, was clumsy and couldn't study or excel in sports. She was always there, subtly helping me, the one who was constantly teased by others. She was my first love. Back then, she was taller than me, and I had this childish idea that I would confess my feelings to her when I became taller than her someday. But that day never came. She transferred to another school when we were in 5th grade. I think she mentioned it was because of her father's job transfer, but it was truly sudden. Of course, I couldn't confess anything, and all I managed to say was, "See you later." To meet my first love again in a situation like this, it was unimaginable. And not only that, I was glad that she remembered me too. While I was hospitalized, she made time to visit my room. She even brought snacks outside of her working hours. I looked forward to talking to her every day. It was the highlight of my day. But sadly, the day of discharge came quickly. I didn't want our parting to be just a simple "see you later" like it was in elementary school, so I gathered my courage and asked for her contact information. "Can I have your contact?" I was so nervous that I thought she could hear my heart pounding, but she readily agreed. "Of course, that's fine. I've lost touch with all our classmates from back then, so I'm happy that you reached out to me." With her gentle smile, I realized it clearly. I had fallen in love with her all over again. She probably just thought of me as a former classmate she reunited with. From here on, I wanted to somehow appeal to her and elevate myself to a potential romantic partner. That's what I had in mind. After my discharge, we exchanged messages and had various conversations. In addition to that, we started going out to eat together. She remembered a lot about my time in elementary school. Although she only seemed to remember embarrassing and clumsy anecdotes like when I cried because I couldn't eat mushrooms, or when I got hit in the face with a basketball pass, or when I fell with my school bag into a ditch and ended up covered in mud. Despite that, she would laugh and say, "You were cute back then." So, I felt like it was okay to be clumsy. And during one of our meals together, I confessed my feelings to her. After I asked her out, Margaret fell silent. Then, in a small voice, she said, "I'm sorry. It was disappointing, even though I had tried my luck with the confession." But since she seemed apologetic and had a somber expression, I made an effort to maintain a cheerful expression. "No, don't worry about it. I just wanted to express my feelings. I don't think I can be a match for someone like you, Margaret." When I said that, Margaret seemed flustered and denied it. "No, it's not like that. It's not that I dislike you or anything." It seemed like she had something else she wanted to say. "Is there another reason? If you don't want to say it, that's fine. But if you want to let it out, I'm here to listen." After hearing my words, Margaret seemed to have made up her mind. She let out a small sigh and then began to speak. I was married once. I'm divorced. I got married right after college. He was really kind, and I loved him so much, but he cheated on me. On one of the nights I had a night shift and there was a sudden change in my schedule. I came home and found a woman I didn't know there, and it wasn't the first time. It seemed like he had been bringing women over whenever I had a night shift. Her voice was trembling, and I could tell she was shaken. I wanted to hold her hand, but our relationship didn't allow for that, and it frustrated me. I had no idea until then. After that, it became difficult for me to trust in a relationship, so I'm sorry. She bravely shared her painful memories and accepted my feelings with sincerity. All I had was gratitude towards her. Upon learning about my feelings, she said it might be better if we didn't contact each other anymore. I was the one desperately trying to hold on to her. I expressed that I wanted to meet again, even if it was just as friends. I wanted to bring a smile to my first love who had been hurt. I rejected your confession. Are you okay with meeting me?" Upon hearing those words, I vigorously shook my head side to side like a fool. "No way, of course not." My desperation finally brought a smile to her face. From then on, Margaret and I continued to meet as friends, just the two of us. The change came about half a year later. It all started with the accident I was involved in. A drunk driver crashed into the pedestrian crossing. In an instant, I reached to protect the child walking beside me. I felt like I was hit by the car and was thrown a short distance. And when I regained consciousness, I was in a hospital room. I woke up 2 days after the accident had occurred. This time, I was in a different hospital from where Margaret worked, and she wasn't there. Instead, my parents were with me. When I checked my phone, I saw a flurry of messages and missed calls from Margaret. We had plans to meet on the day of the accident. Without any contact and unable to reach me for 2 days, her messages expressed concern about my well-being. I hurriedly called her, but she didn't pick up. She was probably at work. But I didn't want to keep her worrying, so I called the hospital where she worked. And after being able to reach her, she came to my hospital room 2 hours later. My parents had just left. Honestly, since she was working, I thought I wouldn't be able to see her that day, so I was surprised. "Why are you here? What about work?" But she didn't answer my question. Instead, tears began to stream down her face. I panicked and tried to speak to her, but she didn't respond. I even offered her tissues to wipe away her tears, but she didn't take them. She continued crying, not worrying about her face getting soaked with tears. And after she had cried to her heart's content, she started lecturing me endlessly. "Sean, you get injured way too much. How many times do you have to be taken to the hospital to learn your lesson?" It was the first time she scolded me. Well, this time, it was more like helping someone. Help people without getting injured, you idiot. As excited and agitated as she was, sometimes her words didn't make much sense. However, I understood that she genuinely cared about me. During the 2 days when she couldn't reach me, she couldn't sleep, worried at night. So when she received a call from me at her workplace, she immediately left early and rushed to my side. Seeing her eyes being puffy with bags, I couldn't help but feel remorse for causing her concern, even though I was trying to protect a child in the accident. Suddenly disappearing without a word, I didn't feel alive. "Let's stop this kind of thing. This will be the last time, okay?" she insisted, emphasizing her point, and I promised. "Yeah, from now on, I'll be careful. I won't worry you." Upon seeing me again, she muttered, "This is dangerous." I was taken aback and at a loss for words, and that's when she showed me her first smile of the day. "I can't just leave a clumsy person like you alone. I have to keep an eye on you," she said. "So, you mean, as friends?" I asked cautiously. Margaret smiled and said, "As a boyfriend and a girlfriend." I stood frozen for about 3 seconds, then shouted, "Yes," and did a victory pose with a loud voice. It caused some pain in my broken rib, and I had to press the nurse call button, but I didn't care because I was so happy. From then on, Margaret and I continued our relationship smoothly, and a year later, we decided to get married. However, for the first time since we started dating, problems arose between Margaret and me. It happened on the day I came home from work, just a few days before our wedding. We had been living together for 2 months, and Margaret would always greet me when I returned from work. But on that day, Margaret wasn't there to welcome me. Feeling funny, I entered the living room, and what I saw surprised me. Margaret was crying. She had both hands covering her face as she silently wept. What's wrong?" I approached Margaret anxiously, and she moved her hands away from her face. Her eyes were red from crying. "What were you doing? It's so late." I arrived home after 10 p.m. But I had informed her that I would be late due to work. Didn't I tell you? It's because of work." "Really, lately, it's been happening every day, hasn't it? Is the cake shop that busy at this time of the year? I feel like it's not really work." I didn't understand the meaning behind Margaret's words. There was no reason for me to be late other than work. I didn't have frequent outings with friends or any hobbies. She should have known that. "You're not seeing someone, are you, like another woman?" Margaret said while crying, and tears streamed down her face once again. It was at that moment that I finally realized. Margaret suspected me of cheating. It was true that I had been working overtime frequently for the past month. Was she carrying this anxiety every day? Margaret had experienced a divorce before due to her partner's infidelity. I felt so pathetic, realizing how much I had made Margaret worry during this past month. I tightly held Margaret's hands with my both hands. "I'm sorry, I started working late suddenly, and it made you anxious. Whenever I asked for details about your work, you always deflected the question. I wondered if you couldn't tell me. I believe you wouldn't cheat, but because of my past and the fear of being kept in the dark, I felt anxious." It was true that I had been evasive when Margaret asked about the specifics of my overtime work. I wanted to make Margaret happy, but instead, I ended up hurting her. At this point, there was no other choice but to tell her the truth. "Come with me." I took Margaret to the cake shop owned by my family, where I worked. There were numerous cake illustrations and cake samples in the refrigerator. "Is this a wedding cake?" Margaret murmured as she looked at the illustrations. "Yes, I wanted to make our wedding cake myself. I've been thinking about what kind of cake would be good. I wanted to surprise you and make you happy. That's why I couldn't talk much about my overtime work. But it made you anxious, didn't it?" Margaret let out a deep sigh upon hearing my words. Perhaps she had been on edge all this time. "I'm sorry for doubting you. It's all right. They say it's common to feel anxious before getting married. And considering your past with your ex-husband, I understand how being kept in the dark can make you anxious. I'm sorry for making you worry." After exchanging apologies, Margaret eagerly tasted the cake samples I had made and exclaimed, "It's delicious," with a smile on her face. Looking back, we had been busy with wedding preparations and creating trial wedding cakes for the surprise, leaving little time to spend together. It felt like it had been a while since I last saw Margaret smile like this. Margaret said, "I'm looking forward to the wedding cake," and she didn't seem to have any anxieties. It's unfortunate that it wasn't going to be a surprise, but Margaret's peace of mind is more important. I'll do my best, so look forward to it. I decided at that moment to make the best cake ever. So, on the day of the wedding, she looked incredibly beautiful in her wedding dress, and there was no bias in that statement. Margaret was overjoyed when she saw my large wedding cake. When she said she couldn't eat because it is a waste, I jokingly said, "Please eat it. I made it just for you." During the first bite, where the bride and groom feed each other cake in front of everyone, both Margaret and I had beaming smiles. As I scooped up the cake and offered it to Margaret, she instinctively held my hand, holding the spoon tightly. Then she opened her mouth wide and took a bite of the cake. "I'm so happy. It's the most delicious cake I've ever had. Thank you so much," she said with a smile. She was the most beautiful in the world, and I reaffirmed my determination to make her happy. I used to think that I was prone to accidents and had a streak of misfortune, but thanks to getting injured, I was able to reunite with such a beautiful bride and marry her. Maybe I'm actually lucky. That's what I think now. How is it? By subscribing to the channel, you can support our production. See you again in the next video.